Okay, today we're opening up a truly chilling case file. This is one where a terrifying urban legend violently collides with the absolute darkest depths of human corruption. In this explainer, we are diving deep into the story of the Didfutia. Some call it the 18-inch Jinn. We're going to see exactly how a ghost story, the kind usually whispered just to scare kids, was actually weaponized for pure, unadulterated greed. And we'll follow a deeply skeptical journalist who walked right into a nightmare that logic and facts simply couldn't explain away. So buckle up, because the narrative we're about to untangle takes some incredibly dark, twisted turns, blending the supernatural with very real, very human malice.
Picture this for a second. You're walking down a completely empty, pitch-black street in the dead of night. The silence around you is heavy, just totally oppressive. And then, out of nowhere, breaking that silence right behind your shoulder, you hear it. A child's voice. It sounds thin and innocent, sure, but underneath that, there is a cadence that is deeply, deeply unnatural. It whispers, "Paya, brother, I want to go home." Now, everything in your human nature, your basic instinct, screams at you to turn around, right? To offer help, to see who is lost in the dark. But turning around is exactly how you seal your fate.
So this whole thing kicks off in a quiet, unassuming little place called the Narsinghpur colony. This area suddenly became the epicenter of a string of completely bizarre, unsolved deaths. Naturally, this caught the attention of a seasoned crime journalist named Ragov. Now, Ragov wasn't superstitious in the slightest. He dealt strictly in facts, clues, and hard motives. Monsters? Yeah, he didn't believe in them. He marched straight into the local police station, demanding answers about 3 specific victims who had seemingly vanished or died without leaving a single rational trace behind. But as he dug into the files, he discovered one terrifying pattern. Right before each death, independent witnesses reported hearing the voice of a young child in the night. And the absolutely crucial detail, every single victim was violently killed only after looking over their shoulder.
Okay, let's dive into this footage, because this is the exact moment Rogov's airtight skepticism really starts to crack. The local police inspector, who is just exhausted and completely out of leads, decides to show Ragov some CCTV recording. Look closely at the timestamps here. At 2:17 a.m., you see a man just walking down the street. Simple enough. But a minute later, at 2:18 a.m., he stops dead in his tracks. He looks back in absolute, unvarnished terror and frantically starts running. And then, at 2:19 a.m., something completely unnatural breaks the frame. A tiny, incredibly dense, dark shape lunges from the ground directly at the man's shoulder from behind. The impact is so sudden and violent that the camera instantly cuts to a wall of static. Whatever that thing was, it was for sure not a normal human attacker.
So while Ragov is sitting there, completely frozen, just staring at that blank screen, an old local woman named Shakila Appa quietly approaches him. She basically tells him point blank that his whole investigation is flawed. Why? Because he wasn't looking for a human being at all. He was hunting the dead Fuchsia, a Jinn's child. And Shakila Appa's lore paints this horrifying, highly tactile picture. This entity isn't some massive towering beast. It is literally 1.5 feet tall. It's got a twisted, mangled body, unnaturally long hands that just drag on the ground, backward-facing feet, and this grotesque half-burnt face. But hey, do not let its small size fool you. This creature possesses 100 times the physical strength of a normal man, and its primary source of nourishment? It consumes human shadows. Shakila Appa actually laid out a rule book for this Jinn, and understanding these exact rules is quite literally a matter of life and death. The entity is a master predator of deception. Rule 1. It always, without fail, calls its victims from behind. It flawlessly mimics the voices of children or sometimes even loved ones, specifically to trick you into turning around. If you do turn, you are met with its completely pupilless, pitch-black eyes. It strikes right in that moment of paralyzing fear to physically tear away your shadow. But here's the kicker. Even with all this terrifying power, it has one major, highly exploitable weakness. The Death Putia is absolutely terrified of iron. Now, what does our rational, fact-based journalists do with this information? Ragov decides he has to test this local myth himself. He wasn't about to let a ghost story dictate a real-world investigation. So he walks out alone into those empty streets. It was exactly 2 a.m. The air was just dead silent. Then he heard it. Paya. He stopped. You can imagine his heart just pounding against his ribs. Fighting every logical instinct he had, he slowly looked over his shoulder. And standing right there on the pavement was the twisted, half-burnt child. Before Ragov could even process this impossible sight, the creature smiled this horrific smile, leaped an incredible distance right off the ground, and landed squarely on his chest, heavily choking the breath right out of his lungs. As Ragov felt the immense, crushing weight of this entity trying to violently rip his shadow away into the darkness, his mind raced back to Shakila Appa's rulebook. Iron. He manages to force his hand into his jacket pocket, pulls out an everyday iron house key, and strikes the creature with literally all his remaining strength. The Jinn cuts out this ear-piercing shriek and instantly vanishes into thin air. Ragov survived. He was alive, but as he pulled himself up from the concrete, the consequence of the encounter became devastatingly clear. He looked down under the glow of the street lamp and realized the Jinn had actually succeeded. His shadow was completely gone. Panting and totally terrified, Ragov rushes straight back to Shakila Appa. He's desperately hoping that driving the creature away meant the nightmare was finally over. But instead of comfort, she delivers a chilling revelation that completely changes the stakes. Losing your shadow? It isn't just a close brush with death. It's actually a creeping death sentence of a completely different kind. You see, the Jinn doesn't just eat shadows for a quick meal. It eats them to hollow you out from the inside. It needs an empty physical host to anchor itself to this world. And without his shadow acting as a spiritual shield, Ragov was slowly, inevitably becoming the Jinn's brand new vessel. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the why. Why was this ancient, terrifying demon stalking the streets of Narsinghpur in the first place? Well, it wasn't random chance. And this is exactly where the sheer horror of the supernatural crashes headfirst into the dark reality of human nature. Shakila Appa revealed a cold, heavily calculated real estate conspiracy. Turns out, a wealthy, entirely corrupt local builder had hired a dark magic practitioner, a tantric, specifically to summon the Jinn. That was step one. Step 2, intentionally target innocent victims to generate massive sensational news coverage. Step 3, use that coverage to spark absolute mass panic, forcing all the terrified residents to pack up and evacuate. And finally, step 4, the builder swoops in and legally buys up the suddenly vacant multi-million-dollar land for literally pennies on the dollar. It is pure, unadulterated human greed using an ancient horror as a cheap real estate tool. Targeting Ragov, who was a very prominent journalist, was actually a key part of their plan, ensuring the news of the attacks would spread like wildfire. But Ragov was rapidly changing. The rational, sharp-minded skeptic we met earlier was gone, replaced by a horrifying, agonizing physical transformation. He could actively feel his internal organs burning, like they were roasting from the inside out. His hands began to visibly twist and warp, mimicking the mangled limbs of the entity. When he tried to call for help, his voice came out heavy, cracked, and completely unnatural. And perhaps most disturbing of all, his living, breathing body literally began to exude the putrid, unmistakable stench of a rotting grave. Now, the physical pain was excruciating, for sure, but the psychological torment was arguably so much worse. Delirious and actively losing control of his own body, Ragov ran out into the street. He could hear the phantom sound of hundreds of tiny footsteps echoing right behind him. He collapsed under a flickering street lamp. And right there, he experienced a visceral, stomach-dropping horror that defied all logic. His shadow wasn't lying flat on the ground. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't even attached to him. It was standing completely upright on the brick wall next to him, exactly the size of a 3-year-old child. As Ragov watched in pure terror, the shadow slowly raised its hands and pantomime choking him. And out on the street, Ragov actually felt an invisible grip tighten around his own throat as he violently began to suffocate. Gasping for tiny slivers of air, Ragov forced his fading mind to remember the final, most absolutely crucial rule of Jinn lore that Shakila Appa had taught him. Jinns are not ghosts. They are not the spirits of dead humans. According to the ancient texts, they are entities born entirely of smokeless fire. And because their true form is fire and smoke, human weapons are utterly useless against them. You can't shoot a Jinn. You can't stab it. To permanently destroy the entity, it must first be physically trapped using its one true weakness, iron. And then, it has to be consumed by its own primordial element. It literally has to be burned alive. Okay, we're in a race against time now. The timeline of Ragov's final stand is a desperate, harrowing battle against his own decaying mind. By 3 a.m., fighting tooth and nail against the demon that's trying to pilot his body, Ragov drags his twisted limbs to an old, abandoned leather factory on the dark outsides of town. This was the tantric's hidden lair. Inside, at 3:05 a.m., the corrupt builder and the tantric are busy celebrating their newfound wealth.
But the Jinn, now utilizing Ragov's newly possessed, incredibly fast, and super strong body, lunges out of the dark. It grabs the tantric right by the throat, snarling that it is no human slave. By 3:10 a.m., a brutal inner battle rages, a war between the last dying shred of Ragov the journalist and the ancient demon actively controlling his limbs.
The factory erupts into absolute uncontained chaos. Ritual fires break out and start spreading across the floor as the Jinn violently breaks free from the tantric's magical control. Amidst the collapsing, burning factory, Ragov's human consciousness manages to spot a massive, open industrial acid tank nearby. Gathering every single ounce of his remaining willpower, fighting the monster from inside its own new skin, Ragov forces his jaw open and screams out, "If this body is your home, then I will destroy your home, and you will die with it." Ragov literally plunged his hand into a nearby ceremonial fire pit, deliberately setting his own clothes and flesh completely ablaze. As the flames rapidly licked up his skin, a heart-stopping, agonizing demonic shriek tore right out of his own mouth. The Jinn, terrified of being consumed, frantically tried to escape, attempting to shift its form into thick black smoke to flee the burning host. But Ragov was totally ready for this exact moment. In a heroic ultimate sacrifice, he grabbed a massive, heavy iron chain from the factory floor. Wrapping it tightly, even though it was scalding hot against his own melting flesh, he physically bound the billowing black smoke, completely trapping the demon inside the body with him. Bound tightly by the iron chain and entirely consumed by the roaring fire, Ragov threw himself toward total destruction. The very next moment, a massive explosion rocked the foundations of the leather factory, lighting up the entire night sky. By the time the local police arrived the next morning, as the smoke cleared, they found absolutely nothing but scorched concrete and ashes. There was no trace of Ragov, no trace of the wealthy builder or the tantric. And in a truly tragic, cynical twist of real-world irony, the authorities dismissively filed the official report as a simple, accidental gas leak. The case was officially closed, neatly swept right under the rug. And for several months, the Narsimpur colony was quiet. Peaceful even. People actually started to move back. But then, fast forward a bit, a brand new watchman was working the late-night shift. The street was incredibly dark and completely empty. Suddenly, slicing right through the dead silence, from right behind his shoulder, a thin, innocent voice spoke up. "Bhaiya, it's very dark out here. Do you have a little light?" The watchman spun around, shining his flashlight into the dark. But the street was completely empty. But here's the thing. The CCTV camera mounted on the wall, it saw exactly what his human eyes couldn't. When the security team checked the footage the next morning, there it was. Standing right behind the watchman on the grainy footage was a tiny, dense, 1.5-foot shadow, slowly waving its hand at the lens. The terrifying twist of this entire case file, Ragov successfully destroyed the physical body for sure. But without a dark master to bind it, and without a human host body to finally contain it, the shadow entity somehow survived the fire. The 18-inch Jinn is now completely free, wandering those dark streets, hungrily looking for its next home. So what does this all mean? Well, we've seen how an ancient, unspeakable terror was manipulated by the very modern evil of human greed. We've seen how a highly logical, skeptical journalist gave his own life, making the ultimate sacrifice against an entity that literally feeds on our natural instinct to look back. But the reality is, that entity is still out there, hiding in the dark right now. So it leaves us with one final, terrifying thought to take away from this explainer. If you're walking alone tonight, and a quiet, innocent voice calls your name from behind, will you turn around? Thanks for exploring this case with me today. Stay safe out there.